Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the Texas power crisis of February 2021. So here's a little overview with a photo on the right here. This is people waiting in line for looks like a supermarket in very cold weather. So in February 2021, a winter storm hit Texas, which brought ice, low temperatures, and power outages, and it affected 5 million people. 100 people died, and many lost power or water for days. So in the US, there's an East Coast and a West Coast power grid, which splits the country in two. But then right in the middle of the country, southern part is Texas, and they actually have their own power grid. Essentially, there's no weatherly regulation for this type of event, and refineries and natural gas plants were simply not prepared for this type of storm, even though they were asked months before, years before, that this was coming, especially because previous winters we had really bad storms. Well, in Texas, there was really bad storms that they hadn't seen before. Things got really bad. They were really close to this type of event, but politicians, people in charge, didn't want to do anything about it, didn't believe it was real, essentially. Interestingly enough, El Paso, which is on the most western part of Texas, bordering on New Mexico and the Mexican border as well, they're on the western power grid. So they were actually not affected by this, and they kind of became a safe haven for anyone who wanted to come over. But it's very far away from the big cities, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, which is in the middle of Texas. So a lot of people didn't make the trip or weren't able to make the trip, couldn't get gas, power, water, stuff like that. So and then there were people who got power within 1 or 2 days, actually usually wealthy communities, but they were actually paying very high energy bills. So the Texas mentality. So many people in Texas have this mentality of we can do it all on our own. We don't need anyone else. And it kind of all comes from their history because in 1836, the white settlers, they secured their independence from Mexico, and they're actually their own country for 11 years. In addition to that, they also seceded with the South from the North in the Civil War in the 1860s. So yeah, this mentality has led to Texas believing that they don't need help, they can do everything on their own. And currently, these regulations make it hard to transport power outside the system. So that's why it took a few days for power to come in, water as well. Eventually, I think it was in 1 or 2 days, they were given help by the Biden administration, which is our president currently, who declared it a national emergency. He gave federal aid. And then there was lawsuits ensued for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, and 4 board members resigned. So currently those lawsuits are still in litigation. So climate change and politics, because sadly these two are intertwined. So over here, this is Greg Abbott. He's the governor of Texas. He's very Republican, so traditionally that party opposes the idea of climate change or that it was created by humans. He's been a critic of climate change or energy bills in the past. So there's new energy regulations in the US, and it was put by the Biden administration. And the governor vowed to sue. Even he signed an executive order saying he would fight these regulations through litigation, so in court. Before this winter storm, he spoke with the climate change denialist Joe Bastardi. He's a meteorologist who asserts that climate change is natural and not caused by humans. This is actually a few days before this happened, so likely this was a huge influence on him. Also, a year before, he would talk with other government officials about this crisis, and they would tell him, you need to change your infrastructure. Essentially, the pipes are going to burst. They are not prepared for this type of wind chill. And then in El Paso, they have their own power grid. They have their own system. They actually were prepared for this because they saw the storm, and because it's weird. They're like their own city and they're very far away from Texas. It's not in the major city centers, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. So they kind of do their own thing. They actually rebuilt their pipes, their water system, stuff like that after, I think it was 2 years ago, their winter storm. And yeah, anyways, 99.9% of scientists agree with the fact that climate change is humanly caused and not just natural. So it's weird that he would just try to find anything that confirms his bias, essentially, with not looking at all the other scientists who say otherwise. So there are effects on prisoners as well. So in April, the American Oversight they obtained complaints, and it was reported on the Houston Chronicle about conditions inside the Galveston County Jail during the storm. I think this is right outside Houston. Although backup generators kept power on the facility, it was left without running water. So there was drinking water shortages and unsanitary conditions in which people had to use buckets as toilets. I'm sure in other areas around Texas, the same thing happened, but maybe there weren't complaints filed. This is a huge problem because prisoners obviously don't have rights, but at least they were able to file a complaint so that it was reported on the media, and at least hopefully people can read and hear about it. Yeah, that was my presentation. This is the article. Thank you for listening.